Kia ora everyone. So I have just hit record on this presentation, and this is what's new in Koha webinar, and we're going to record this, but you're not visible unless you turn your camera on. So if we would advise you to keep the camera off, and I will now share my slides and turn off my camera as we go through what's new in Koha 24.05 and 23.11. So hopefully everyone can see my slides. If you can't, there should be a restore presentation button down the bottom right hand side of your big blue button window, and that should enable you to see the slides. So these are the slides. I'm also going to, my colleague Wainui is kind of going to be putting links into the chat as we go through the presentation. And this, one of the links is going to be the link to the slide collection. And we're also going to send through all our links to all the resources that we talk about today after the presentation in a follow-up email. So in today's session, we're going to talk a bit about the collaboration and development that results in these Koha releases, how people can contribute to Koha, including how you could contribute. What are some of the fabulous new features in 24.05, a few of the highlights from 23.11, and a chance for questions and answers at the end. Because we have a lot to cover, we're going to go through quite quickly, but if you have any questions as we go through, please put them in chat. And also, as I mentioned, there'll be a chance to talk about some of the questions, and we can give answers at the end of the session as well. But just to give you a little bit of context, it's always good to have some background context about some of these releases. So Koha is an open source project, which means a whole community of people, organizations such as Catalyst, which is a support vendor, also other support vendor companies around the world, and volunteers and librarians all around the world maintain and enhance Koha. Every 6 months, a big release of Koha, of new features, of fixes, of enhancements comes out. And so these two examples that we're talking about today, 24.05 and 23.11, are two of those what we call major Koha upgrades. We also have smaller monthly minor upgrades, and that's usually fixes rather than big enhancements. That's why we find these 6 monthly releases so exciting, because this is where most of the new features, most of the enhancements and all the really exciting stuff comes in these 6 monthly releases. Catalyst is a regular contributor to the Koha community in a variety of different ways, which I'll touch on briefly, but anyone can contribute to Koha. You could contribute to Koha from your library by sharing anonymized usage statistics through Heya, which is an online statistics platform where you can share things like what system preferences your Koha library has enabled, anonymized information around how much borrowing you have, what features you use, and then this can enable the Koha community to know where to prioritize more development effort in the future, because they see, okay, this particular module is enabled in the system preferences from a large number of libraries, therefore this is something that we want to target more development effort towards because it's a widely used piece of functionality. So it's useful to direct the community into what's actually being used. Sharing content with the Koha community, you can share things like reports, SQL reports, and subscription numbering patterns with the community through a system called Mana KB. So this is a way that you can share your SQL reports and subscription numbering patterns to an online database, which other libraries can then download from and use. It's a bit like if you've used the Koha community reports wiki page, it's a bit like that. You can share reports that you've written with other libraries and conversely download SQL reports that they have written. As always, test the reports on your Koha test site if you have one, just to make sure that firstly it will run, and secondly, if it's a resource intensive one, you don't want to overload the server by running a really large report during a busy time of the day. People can also contribute directly to Koha. You could test code patches, so code changes that others in the community have written. You could write your own code change. That could be code, or it could be fixing typos. So there's a whole variety of different things that you can write patches for. Or if you're not wanting to test and write patches, you could also sponsor other people's. You could sponsor an organization like Catalyst to write a bug fix or a new feature or enhancement, and then because when we write enhancements, we write them in a generic enough way that we can upstream everything we possibly can, so that other libraries in the community can benefit, and so that it's not a customization that you'll have to follow through with maintenance in future upgrades. Also, the Koha community runs a conference every year. This year it's in Montreal, Canada in September, and our colleague, our technical lead in our team, Alicia, is going to be going along to that and presenting there. You can either, of course, go yourself if you're going to be in Canada then, or you can also watch online. So it's a hybrid conference. It's possible for people to engage and watch online. It's free to join, and there's a whole wonderful variety of different talks from developers and librarians about how different libraries use Koha, what new features are being developed, a whole range of interesting talks there. So it's a really good opportunity for professional development by attending virtually the KohaCon talks. So we have some test site. This is our Catalyst demo site URLs. For the first link is for the OPAC, the public interface. The second link is for the staff client, the librarian interface. Our demo site is refreshed every day. So if you want to have a go with some of these new features, you can go into the demo site, play around there, and then any changes you make will have been wiped by the next morning. So you don't need to worry about if you might break things, because it will be wiped anyway by the next morning. So please do feel free after this to go along and have a play on our demo site. So Koha 2405 came out in May, and it had a lot of different new features and enhancements, as you can see here from some of the stats around some of the changes it introduced. So I'm going to talk about these different changes in our today. We have a link to the Catalyst blog post, which is where we highlight some of our team's favorite changes in this release. Not all of the changes, but just highlighting some of our favorites. We also have a link to the release notes where you can read about every single change in 2405. And then these are the different features and enhancements we're going to talk about today. As you can see, we have tried to pick, you can see in the square brackets, we've tried to pick a variety of different features. So hopefully there'll be something for everyone there for letting you know, okay, what sort of things might we be able to cover. And again, a whole lot more there. So let's crack on and have a look at some of these. So this first enhancement is the ability for you to lock bibliographic records from being able to be modified by most users. So what you can do is basically make your bibliographic record read-only, and then you can explicitly allow a subset of your staff users to be able to edit those records. Those users need to have the edit locked records permission enabled. That enables them to be able to edit. But for all the other staff users, if they don't have that permission enabled, they cannot edit this record or the records that you've locked. Some important things to know about this enhancement is that currently it only works when a library uses an external cataloging system, and then that cataloging system pushes the records through to Koha. The way that that would work is by the external cataloging system making what's called an API call to Koha. So an API is a bit of code in a system like Koha that other systems can run. So another system can run a bit of code in Koha to add a record, a bibliographic record to Koha. So if your library uses Koha for cataloging, you're currently not able to use this. However, the community is working on a follow-up, which I checked today, and it's coming along through the upstreaming process. So hopefully we'll have it for 2405, whereby you can actually mark a record as read-only for most of your users, even if you, regardless of where you've created that record. So if you're cataloging the record in Koha, then you could mark it as read-only, same as if you catalog records in an external system. Either way, you could do it, but we're not there yet. The way that you actually go about locking a record is in the administration module of Koha. There's a new record sources page. In here, you can create a record source. So in this case, I've made one called created from cataloging system. For these record sources, you can say if a record with this source created from cataloging system, if I make a bibliographic record, I set this to the source, then because my source has can be edited set to no, that means this record will be locked, it'll be read-only for most users. So eventually, when this functionality comes through to all records, including those you created in Koha, what you'd want to do is when you're editing a bibliographic record in Koha, you'd want to set your record source to one of the configured values you've set up. And as long as that value has a can be edited set to no, that would mean that you could not actually edit the record, it would be read-only. So this is a bit of functionality that most libraries won't have yet, but it's something to look forward to, hopefully in 2411. Like I mentioned, this currently only applies to bibliographic records, not authority records, and only applies to when a library uses an external cataloging system, and that makes an API call to Koha. It does not apply in the Koha cataloging module. But it's going to be exciting to see when this finally comes through to the cataloging module and how libraries use it. But it could very much be a useful thing for libraries if they want to give cataloging permissions to most of their users, but maybe not the trainee catalogers that are still learning, just to make sure that certain really important bibliographic records aren't modified and a bit protected. That could be a bit of a use case for using this functionality. This is an interesting one. So in Koha 2305, the community added the ability for users, both in the OPAC, if you had OPAC catalog concerns system preference enabled, and in the staff client if you had catalog concerns pref enabled. It was a way that library users could report problems with catalog data. Maybe there was the wrong title, maybe that someone had a concern about some of the metadata in a catalog record. Anyway, users could report problems to the library and the library would see those and fix them. Since then, and especially in 2405, the Koha community has really worked on enhancing this a lot, and it's basically turning Koha into a bit of a ticket management system. So now users, what you could actually do is when a catalog concern pops up, when you're on the staff client homepage, at the bottom would be a notification of the homepage to say someone's reported a concern. If you click on it, now you can firstly assign the concern to someone. So in this case, in the yellow highlighted, the screenshot, we have assigned fixing this concern or investigating it to Henry Acevedo. So you can assign concerns to someone, a bit like a ticket management system. Also, you can create custom statuses and assign those. So you might have a status of important, you might have a status of unimportant, all sorts of things. And you can also create a custom resolution status, which is relevant to your library. Both of these statuses are things that you can control in your Koha authorized categories. So in the administration module, there's an authorized value category page where a lot of libraries will define things like lost statuses, things like that, or not for loan statuses. Well, there's new ones where you can define a custom status for when a catalogue concern is open and being dealt with, and then also when you've resolved it. So now that you've got statuses and you can assign tasks to a particular staff patron, it's increasingly coming along to be a ticket management system. And I saw the community is also looking at integrating this feature with some other things like around acquisitions, if there's things to track, like around subscriptions. A subscription hasn't arrived, so you might be able to eventually log a ticket within Koha to give to a staff member to investigate and follow that up. So that's one of the bug reports that I saw has come out of this enhancement, turning Koha more and more into a way that's easy to track regular library tasks, assigning a job to someone and then having statuses for that. So it'll be interesting to see how that functionality comes along in the future. But right now, catalogue concerns is something that you can easily track. This is a feature that we did for our partner library, Auckland University of Technology, AUT. What it enables a library to do is save library opening hours within Koha. So for each day of the week, you can say, okay, we open at 9 and we close at 5 or whatever it might be. That's the first point of it. And then the second point of it is there's a new system preference called Consider Library Hours in Circulation. This enables a library to determine what happens with high circulating items in regards to those opening hours. So, for example, a lot of tertiary libraries will have hourly loans. So you might have a 3-hour loan. If your library closes at 5 p.m. and someone checks out the item at 4 p.m., what would happen is previously, there was no way for libraries to have any control over what happens with that loan. How do you want the loan to be handled given it's being checked out really close to when the library closes? Now that you can set the system preference into there's 3 options for it. The first is don't consider the library opening hours. So what that would mean is if you checked out your item, your short loan item, which has a 3-hour due period that the user can have it for. If you check it out at 4 p.m., with this option set in the system preference, Koha would set it to be returned. The due time would be 7 p.m., but of course the library is closed then, so that might not be very helpful. Another option is to shorten the loan period. So because Koha checks, okay, on today's date, the library closes at 5 p.m, therefore the item is due at 5 p.m. So the user can only have it for 1 hour because they've checked it out late in the day. Another option is to extend the loan period. With this, you can actually make it so that the item is due at 9 a.m. the next day. So the next time that the library opens, then it's due. So the person has use of that item overnight. So this gives libraries flexibility around how do they handle due dates and due times with regards to their library opening hours if people are checking out items around the time when the library is closing. So that's quite a good bit of granular control that libraries have now. The system preference is really nice. So this is this enhancement adds a new system preference, display multi-item holds. If you have this enabled, when someone goes and places a reserve in the OPAC and the staff client, instead of seeing radio buttons for placing a hold on a specific item, now it's checkboxes. So someone can, so in this case, in my screenshot, I've ticked 2 items, so I want to place a specific item level hold on this first item and the third item. Previously, this wasn't possible. Either all you could do is if you selected specific item, you could choose one item only. So this would be really useful if a user is placing a reserve on a journal title, because they might want the January edition and the March edition, and in one single reserve action, they can place a reserve on the January and the March issue. So it's again a time-saving strategy, but it's also really good to enable your users to be able to, especially for those journal records, place multiple item level holds in a single action. This enhancement, adding geo-search, is really good for libraries that use, if your library uses Elasticsearch as your search engine. So now what you can do is save and search for coordinates. So a lot of cartographic and mapping materials are associated with a particular place in the world. With this, in the 034S and the 034T subfields in MARC, you can save a latitude and a longitude. And also, you can now search for those latitudes and longitudes. The community is still working on, what I mean by that is these new subfields are now indexed into Elasticsearch, that's searchable. The community is working on a interface where there's a text box, an input box for latitude and an input box for longitude to be able to search. However, we're not there yet, so that's going to be coming in the future. But it does mean that now that this information is indexed, it can be used, can be eventually searchable. In the meantime, while we wait for the community to add that interface, there is this interesting plugin, HKS3 geo-search plugin. So now what you can do is when you do a normal search for, say, a title, with this plugin enabled, if you use the Koha OPAC, what you can do is actually see on this search result page, each of our bibliographic records on the map. Koha has pinpointed, okay, the 034S and 034T for this first item is here, and then the second item is here. So it's a great way to see, okay, these materials are associated with this place, not where they're stored, but where the coordinates that you've saved in the MARC are associated with. So that's quite nice to be able to actually use those MARC fields and that indexed information now to see, okay, where is this metadata associated with in a really visual way. So that's quite fun. This enhancement was something sponsored by our partner organisation, Educational Services Australia, SCIS, which is a cataloguing organisation. And when they sponsored us to add a new system preference, redirect to sole result. When that's enabled, if you do a search in the OPAC and the staff client and there's just one result, rather than showing a search result page with just one result that you then have to click into, we're just going to redirect straight into that title item page. We're basically skipping a click. It's one click, but it's still a time saver, and we love to see more time-saving options being added to Koha. This is another good time saver, and this one is more for your librarians. This is going to save library staff users a bunch of time. So with this functionality, currently when a lost item is paid for or is written off, so when a library staff user goes in and pays on behalf of a patron, marks the lost item as paid or writes off the fine, they have to then go through and change the lost status of the item manually. But with these two system preferences, update item lost status when write off and update item lost status when paid, you can now define what's the lost status changed to. You can actually make Koha automatically fix up the lost status when those two actions are completed. That will save the library staff users from having to have yet another job of pay off the fine and then navigate to the item and change the lost status. No longer needed. The Koha will do it for you. So we can see in this case, I've set the item update item lost status when paid to lost and paid for. So that's going to be the status of this item whenever that happens. This enhancement is quite a technical one. It's basically a database architectural change, but it does have real-world implications for libraries. So we can see here with this that we have in our screenshot here, this is a screenshot of a database record. So in this example, we have an authority record in the database. So each row is a different piece of data. So date created, and then that's the date. Modification time, this is the modification time. And what I've highlighted here is we have a new column added to the auth header database table, and this column is called heading. So in this example, we have Attenborough David 1926. So for this example, what the Koha community has done in this enhancement is add a new database field, heading, and that will contain the main heading of an authority record. Why is this helpful? Previously, if you have an SQL query that is doing something like you're querying the auth header table, so you're querying authorities, if you wanted to fetch and pull out the main heading, you'd have to use something called extract value, which is basically a bit of SQL code that is searching for a needle in a haystack. It's going through all of the different MARC fields for an authority record, and it's trying to find the main heading and then pull that out. This was very resource intensive, and it took a long time because it had to search through lots of different MARC fields to find just one MARC field that it was actually after. By extracting that information, the main heading, and storing it in its own dedicated field like this, it means that with your SQL reports in the future, it will be much more straightforward and faster and more efficient for Koha to be able to pull out that main heading and display it, because it's not having to search for that needle in a haystack amongst lots of different MARC fields. It just needs to pull out one single bit of information, the content of the heading column. Something important to bear in mind with this is the community hasn't written a migration script to basically change all your existing authority records and pull out the main heading and stick it in this field. So the use of this new column heading is only for authority records you create after you've upgraded to 2405. So future authority records, you'll be able to query a lot faster using this heading column. Authority records created before your upgrade to 2405, it will still be slower because Koha still has to search for all of those other MARC fields and extract a singular piece of information. But it's good to see that the community is trying to make these reports more efficient, librarians' reports more efficient by pulling out information that librarians would usually be wanting to know, a main heading, and sticking it in its own field so that you can more easily find it and fetch it with your queries. This is an enhancement that enables you to automate some catalog cleanup. So in your catalog, have a think about if you've got duplicate authority records. Might you have duplicates? This enhancement is adding a new script to actually find duplicates and then clean them up. So remove one of the duplicates. It's called dedupe_authorities.pl. You would need a support vendor like us at Catalyst in order to, or someone with access to your Koha server to actually schedule this. It's not something that's completely configurable from the staff client, so you'd need to ask someone with server access to configure it. However, once it's set up, what it will do is search through your catalog and try and find any duplicate authority records. When it's searching for duplicates, it's looking for, do they have the same main heading and are they the same type of authority? Are they exactly identical in that regard? Same heading, MARC fields, same type of authority. If it finds some duplicates, you can then configure the script, okay, you can tell it which one to delete. How you do that is there are 3 different options. You can tell the script, keep the most recent of the authority records. So let's say, using that David Attenborough example I referenced before, if we have a personal name authority, 2 personal name authority records, both David Attenborough, I'm going to tell the script, okay, I want to keep the most recent one. So then the older of the 2 is deleted. Or another option is keep the most used one. So which of those 2 authority records is linked to the most bibliographic records? The one that's most used is kept, the other one is deleted. And then the third option, which isn't very applicable for New Zealand and Australian libraries because it's only applicable for libraries using UniMarc, is to check if the records have a PPM, which is a UniMarc, that's specific to UniMarc. You can actually be even more specific with the script. You can limit, if you don't want the script to go through every single authority in your catalog, but you only want to look, for example, duplicates in amongst the authority records you've created this year, you can add that as a condition to the script. So in this example, I'm passing it a where argument, a parameter, where the date created of the authorities is greater than 31st of December 2023. That's telling the authority, telling the script, okay, I need to look for duplicates in authority records created in 2024. That would obviously make the script faster because it's not looking through 10 years of authorities for duplicates, it's only looking through 1 year. But of course, it does mean it won't get all the duplicates because there might be 9 years worth of duplicate authorities it hasn't checked. But it's nice to have that, again, granular control over what the script does. But it does automate cleaning up your catalog data, which is a really great piece of functionality. This enhancement enables libraries to pull out and collate different MARC fields about authors. So a lot of tertiary and academic libraries, they need to make author and contributor information clearly available to users, students in that case, so that they can do things like citations. So they can do citations and assignments referencing who produced a piece of research or who contributed to a resource. Using the OPAC author identifiers and information system preference, you can now decide to make the Koha OPAC pull together different MARC fields and display them in one group. So in this example, with the system preference, you can pull together different MARC fields and list them as an activity, address, email address of the authors, activity, occupation of the authors, place of birth of the authors, place of death, URL. And then, so in this case, I've ticked all of these. I want all of these pieces of information to be grouped together and displayed in one place clearly. So now, when I look at a record on the OPAC, I have a new author information tab, and I've highlighted it yellow here. So this book, Persuasion by Jane Austen, I have a new author information tab, and we can see the author is Jane Austen, and we've pulled together information from all of a whole variety of different MARC fields: occupation, place of birth, place of death, field of activity, fiction. So what are they known for? So that a student or a user can come in and see clearly, here's a whole bunch of information you could use in your citation when you want to cite this record. Additionally, if you enable your users to search for authority records in the OPAC, at the bottom of an authority record now, it will also have an author information section where it pulls in all of that information again. So I'm looking at the authority record for personal name, heading Jane Austen, and we have pulled together, here's a bunch of information, again, occupation, place of birth, place of death, field of activity about Jane Austen, which can also be used again for those citations for your users. A lot of libraries, particularly special libraries, have enabled the self-checkout module. This is a page in the OPAC where your users, it's a high trust model, so your users can check out items to themselves within the Koha OPAC. Until now, when users wanted to check items out to themselves, they had to do it one at a time. There was a small input box. They'd have to type or scan in a barcode and submit. So if they wanted to check out 10 items, they'd have to do 10 different submissions. Now, with this enhancement, there's a new system preference added, and when it's enabled, you can, instead of having a small input box, you've got a whole text field. You can scan or write in lots and lots of barcodes, hit submit, and you've batch checked them out in one go. So a good time saver. There are some prerequisites for using this. So firstly, you have to enable the self-checkout module in the first place. To do that, you need the web-based self-check system preference enabled. That will actually mean that this page, the self-checkout system page, is actually usable. Without that, you can't do anything. You have to enable the batch checkout system preference so that your users can actually see that big text area, this big text area, and not just a tiny singular text input box. And you have to explicitly enable which patron categories you want to be able to have that batch checkout functionality. So if you want all your users to have it, you'd need to go to SEO, batch checkouts, valid categories, and tick every single patron category that your Koha has, enabling all of those people. Or maybe there's one patron category you want to give access to, so you need to select that so that only those users get the big text area and everyone else gets the small text area where they have to check out one at a time. Earlier I referenced, when I was talking about making bibliographic records locked or read-only, I referenced an API. So a reminder, an API is just a bit of code that other systems can run to effect a change in a system. So another system can run an API endpoint, an API in Koha to affect a change in Koha, whether that be adding data, deleting data, or changing data, or fetching data. In this case, the Koha community has added an API whereby other systems can fetch the previous hold information about a patron. So if your library doesn't use their Koha OPAC as the main search platform for the public, for your users, but use something like the VuFind discovery layer, what this means is when someone is logged into a system like VuFind, VuFind can call an API endpoint in Koha, fetch previous hold information, and display that information in VuFind. This is a way that you can integrate systems. So VuFind can display Koha information. This is an important point because previously, before this enhancement was added, systems like VuFind could only fetch and display information about the current holds of patrons. Now with this enhancement, it can fetch and display information about the previous holds of patrons. So again, it's a great example of Koha making it easier for other systems to integrate with it and making basically really improving the ecosystem of these library and learning and educational systems by making them much more integrated so they can fetch and display data from each other. And so that's really nice to see that new endpoints, new APIs are being added to Koha all the time, making it more integratable with other systems. This is a really good enhancement if you are at your library and you have to do a lot of creating and managing, making new staff patron accounts for new library members coming along. So now you can actually, and there's no system preferences enabled to required to enable this. If you have a whole lot of new library staff people joining and you have to create accounts for them, once you've created the account, rather than having to manually change and set the permission for every single person, which is a laborious job, what you can do is just navigate to an existing patron, to an existing staff patron. In this case, we're looking at Sam Hawkins. And we're going to click copy settings, and then you can navigate to all of your new patron accounts you've just made, and you can click paste, and you can copy the permissions that Sam has to 10 other people, and you don't have to come back and forth every time. So you can just copy once from Sam and then paste, and do 5-10 people all in a single go. And then of course, once you've pasted, you can change it as appropriate if you don't want to copy exactly, but it is a great time saver rather than having to compare, split your page into two and then try and copy, okay, Sam has this checkbox ticked, so I'll check it here. And it's a great time saver there. So we're really happy to see that. Runtime parameters. So this has been a feature of, if you have worked with Koha SQL reports before, this is a feature that you have with your reports. You can add what's called a runtime parameter. This is where you can basically, when you run the report, you get a drop down. So if you've run a report and you've seen a drop down before, so in this case, I've run a report, select items by holding branch, and I have a drop down where I can choose a holding branch name. So in this case, I've chosen Centerville. This whole thing, this whole drop down populated with branch names, that is a runtime parameter. How it looks in the SQL is you have something like where, and then within lesser thans and greater thans, you have a label, select the holding branch, and that's what's displayed in my screenshot. And then a vertical line, a pipe, and then branches. That means it's telling Koha, load a drop down, populate it with branch names. This is a runtime parameter. So you'll see a lot of those if you've looked at things like the Koha SQL reports library. This has been really helpful because it saves users. It saves reports failing, because if you just had a text box and someone had to write in Centerville, they might typo it, there might be human error, and you'll get no results. By using a drop-down, you eliminate that human error. With this enhancement, now when you run a SQL report and you add a runtime parameter, Koha gives you this pop-up where you can control what does the runtime parameter do. So one of the options now is include an option for all. So that means I want my drop-down, as well as having my 10 library branches, I want an all option, so I can run the report and get items with items by holding branch, but I want to search for all branches. So if we look at that, we have an all option in our drop-down now. So rather than having to run it 10 times and then collate the results, I can just run it once with this all option. Another enhancement to the runtime parameters is to enable users to do multiple selections. So now it's turned from a drop-down into a multi-select list. So now I can choose, okay, I want to select items by holding branch, but I want to choose Centerville, Fairview, and Franklin. I don't want Fairfield. So I can select those three, run it, and get the results for those three options. So before, you would have had to run it individually. Centerville, run it, collate, download the results. Fairfield, run it, download the results, and so on. Now you can do it in one go by selecting multiple options, running the report, and you've got all of the items with a holding branch of Centerville, Fairview, and Franklin in a single output. This enhancement is really good if you want to make sure your library comms get through to your patrons. So some people use multiple email addresses, and they might check some email addresses more than others. Those people might have on their Koha patron account, as you might have seen when you were editing patron accounts in Koha, there's multiple email fields that you can fill in. So you might have a primary email field, a secondary email field, and an alternate email field. If you want your library notices to be sent to, say, the primary email and the secondary email, just to make sure that you're getting through to your patrons and they're seeing your communications, you can now set that up with Koha. So with this enhancement, we have two new system preferences. Email field primary. This is if you want to only send notices to a singular email address for each person. With this drop-down, you can choose which of the email addresses you want to send to. So let's say for your users, for some reason, you want to always send notices to only the user's secondary email address. You could choose that. Usually, you'd probably want to send it to the primary email address. So you just keep this drop-down set to primary. If, however, you want to send to primary and secondary email addresses, what you'd do is set this drop-down to selected addresses. And then in the second system preference below it, email field selection, you can choose, okay, which email address fields do I want to use? So in this case, I've ticked primary and secondary. That means whenever Koha generates notices, it's going to send to each person an email to their primary email address and their secondary email address. So your users would get two emails at different addresses, but you'd be making sure that your patrons are seeing your library comms, because if they hardly ever check their primary email address, but they use their secondary email address a lot, okay, they'd see, I've received a notice at my secondary email address, I need to return that item, I need to come and pick up that recall, I have a hold waiting for me, whatever it might be. So this is a good way of getting your message out to your users. If you use print notices or print slips, this enhancement will be really helpful for you. So it adds a new format expandable tab whenever you're editing notices. So in this case, we have a on the notices and slips tool in Koha. That's where you work with notices and you add content. There's now a format tab. If you expand that, you can now save into it custom styling or CSS, where you can do things like change fonts, change background colors, add logos, do all sorts of things like that. And yeah, so you could also add margins, letterheads, things like that. What's really good about this and is helpful if people don't know SQL, if they don't know CSS. So CSS is the styling rules. So in this case, at the start of this piece of CSS, we're defining selectors, which are basically the bits of the notice you want to change. And then within the curly brackets, we're saying make font size 60 pixels. However, you probably might not know what selectors you should set, because you might not know, okay, a notice has a receipt H6 in it. What you can do then is use these handy links up the top. If you click on them, so if you click on the heading link, Koha will automatically pre-populate this style box with all the selectors that you need to add rules for if you want to put styles on the headings. Or if you have a table on your notice, but you don't know what the selector for that table would be, if you click on the tables link, it will pre-populate this drop-down. It will pre-populate this box with the selectors for the table. Then all you need to do is write in the rule, so font size 60 or background color green or whatever it might be. Alternatively, you want to set styling rules for all the text, all the content of your notice. You can click all text and then put your rules, and those rules will be applied to all of the content of your notice. So that's a really nice feature, and it does make it easier if you're not sure what selectors you have to add in order to add styles to your notice. So that's a lot of different features in 2405, and I realize that's a lot. We're going to talk about some of the highlights of 2311 now. As always with Koha, because one version is built on top of another, when you're upgrading to 2405, you would also be getting all of these new features of 2311, because 2405 is built on top of 2311. So 2311 came out in November last year. Lots of new features, enhancements, and bug and security fixes, as we can see from those stats there. And again, in our slide collection here, we have a link to our Catalyst blog post highlighting our favorite features, the release notes highlighting all of the changes, and here's a few of the features that we're going to talk about briefly about 2311. This enhancement is the ability to, essentially, it's like placing a reserve, but it's also a bit different, and I'll explain why. So, and this functionality is only available in the staff client right now, but what you can do is make sure an item is booked. It's put aside for a particular user between two dates in the future. So with reserves, you just go into a queue, and then when the item is available for you, you pick it up, but there's no guarantee that you'll have it between a set date period. With this ability to book items, you can make sure the item is guaranteed available for a particular user between two particular dates in the future. You do enable it on an item by item basis, so it's not something that you configure for a whole item type, or you don't configure it globally. So in this example, I am editing Caterpie, which is my title record. Under the items tab on the left-hand side, we have highlighted here, it's a bit so small to see, but you'll see in the slides Afterwards, we have a bookable drop-down, which is set to no. If I set that to yes, then that means at the top of the page, I'll get a booking link. If I click on that link, I can place a booking. So this would be a library staff member would be placing a booking for a patron. And so in this scenario, I'm placing a booking on my item, PK10. So under the item drop down, I've got the barcode PK10. For the borrower, I'm defining who am I doing the booking for. I'm doing it for myself in this scenario. And then for the period, I'm defining I want to book this item between the 25th of December until the 28th. It doesn't include the 29th, it's just up to the 28th. If I save that, and then I come in and I do another booking for someone else, because Henry also wants that item, I place a booking for them, except those dates, 25th until 28th of December, are now grayed out. I can't place multiple bookings for multiple people during the same date range, so they have to choose either before or after, but it's one person at a time. Now I want to see, okay, what bookings are on this item? How can I manage this? On my Catapy bibliographic record, there is a bookings tab now displaying on the left because at least one of the items on this title is bookable. If I click on the bookings tab, I now get a table showing all my bookings. So in this case, I have my bookings for myself, staff, between the 25th to the end of the day, 28th. And I have a table showing it in a tabular format, what that looks like. So this is a calendar, and then I've got a table view. If I want to cancel a booking, I can do that with the actions column. If I want to edit it and change the date, I can edit that and change dates. So this is how you can actually manage it, manage the bookings for a particular item. How does Koha guarantee that an item will be available between the 21st till the 28th for my user? Well, here's how. If before the 25th of December, I'm checking out this item to Mary Burton, Koha checks and sees, okay, this item has a booking. And it says, when I'm checking out the item, it says, this item is due for another patron booking by the 25th of December. In other words, this item needs to be returned before the 25th of December so that I can, because I've booked it for that date, I want to be able to pick it up then. Koha, therefore, because it can see there's a booking on that from the 25th, and it knows, okay, the item must be back by the 25th, it reduces the due date for that item so that it's due back on the 24th of December. So I can either check it out and tell Mary Burton, okay, we have this item, it has to be due back on the 24th, but someone's booked it from the 25th. Or I can just choose not to check it out. But there's no way for you to override this in the sense that if a librarian has permissions, they'll be able to see this pop up, as we say here, and they can basically override in the sense that they can check out the item, but Koha will make it during the 24th. Or if they don't have specific permissions, they'll just be blocked entirely from checking out the item. But that's how Koha guarantees a booked item will be available for a user during the periods that they have booked it for. Another nice feature, touching on, so I talked for 2405, there's the ability to add custom styles to printed notices and slips. This is a way for you to do another thing with your notices and slips. In this case, you can create entirely customized slips for patrons. Let's say you want to print off a slip and put it in a book to share library news or to share important library information with users that are coming to pick up a book. Now, in the notices and slips tool of Koha, under Koha module, There's all the different modules you can create a notice or a slip for, but our new option here is patron custom slip. If I click on this, I can create an entirely new slip, but whatever information I want to share with my users. How do I then actually print that slip out and use it? Well, whenever you then navigate to any patron account within Koha and click on the print drop-down button at the top of their page, there's now a print and then the name of the slip. So I called my slip testing, so that's why it says print testing slip. But this is how you can print out the slip for this user, stick it in the book, and then they can come and pick it up and see that custom information that you're wanting to share with them. OPAC Trusted Checkout does touch on, it's basically an alternative way of letting users check out items to themselves in the Koha OPAC. So you might remember in 2405, I talked about self-checkout, being able to self-checkout multiple items in one go. Well, this enhancement is basically like the self-checkout module, except it's a different way of letting your OPAC users check out items to themselves. So if you enable the OPAC Trusted Checkout System preference, on the OPAC thereafter, there's a self-checkout link in the header. So this is our demo site, and you can see there's a self-checkout link, which I've highlighted yellow. If I click on that link, I get a pop-up where I can type or scan in an item barcode. If I submit that, then I will be able, it will either check out the item to me, or I'll receive a message saying you can't check out this item because whatever the reason is. But this is another way that you can enable your users to check out items to themselves. You've got the self-checkout functionality, or you've got the OPAC Trusted Checkout functionality. Two different methodologies of doing the same thing, letting your OPAC users, trusting your OPAC users enough to letting them check out items to themselves. Something to bear in mind with this is, in a Koha OPAC, it's possible to hide the barcode in the OPAC. Some libraries choose to do this, but of course, because you're requiring your users to scan or type in the barcode, you need to make the barcode visible in the OPAC. Otherwise, they're not going to know what barcode to enter and therefore what barcode to check out to themselves. This functionality, this enhancement lets your library define different styles for different library branches, so that when someone is logged in, what Koha does is it checks what is the patron's home branch. So if I am an OPAC user and I'm logged into the library, I'm logged into the OPAC, it's going to see, okay, my home branch is Centerville, therefore we're going to display the styles, the CSS and the JavaScript for Centerville library. If my home library is Franklin, I will see different styles for that library. So this is really good if your library wants to display different styles for the different branches. Make it a bit more customized. So the way this works is in Koha, you create and edit library branches, and that's in the administration module. And so in this scenario, I'm editing my library branch CPL, which is Centerville. At the bottom of the page, I have two new options, UserJS and UserCSS. CSS is just style rules. It's ways that you can change colors, fonts, images, and so on. JavaScript is a bit of code that runs that will do things like load a pop-up or hide a link, or it does things, it changes displays. So it does require, this system preference does require one change from a support vendor or someone with access to your Koha server to be able to change what's called an Apache file. So this is a technical change that needs to be done on the server. However, once that's done, you can go ahead and customize away. So in this scenario, A lot of libraries use the OPAC UserCSS and OPAC UserJS system preferences to define global styles to apply to all OPAC sites. That will still be used. Koha isn't going to forget that. This is just when a user's logged in, they will also see styles that you've defined for that particular library. So it's basically a second set of styles that will be applied when your OPAC users are logged in. If the OPAC user has the home branch of Centerville, I'll see the global rules defined in my two system preferences, but I'll also see the library branch specific rules I've defined for the library. You can now protect patron accounts within Koha from being deleted accidentally. This is really good if you have really important staff user accounts or you have a Koha integration. So a lot of libraries that have self-checkout machines, they require a Koha account, a Koha user, which basically the self-check machines authenticate to Koha as. So you don't want those accounts to be deleted because then the self-checkout machines will fail or your integration will fail. But of course, we know sometimes mistakes happen. People might delete a patron account accidentally. So then you have the problem, okay, the integration's failed. Then you have to go and investigate. Then you have to go and create the new patron account. With this enhancement, you can use a protected flag, and that will mean that you're not able to delete the account accidentally. So when we edit a patron account now, we have a protected radio button, which is yes or no. If I set it to yes, when I come and navigate to my Koha account, if I click under more and I hover over delete, it's grayed out and I get the message patron is protected. I'm not able in the staff client to accidentally delete that patron. But it goes further than that. Not only are you protected from deleting the patron when you're on that account, you're also not able to accidentally delete the patron in a batch deletion, so accidentally include a really important account when you're doing batch deletions. Koha is going to stop those protected accounts from being deleted. You're going to be prevented from merging an important account if it's been protected. If you have a delete patrons cron job, which is an automated job set up in your Koha, it won't be able to delete the account. And also, if other systems call your Koha instance, call an API in your instance, they are not able to delete the account either. So it's a really good way to prevent an important account either being deleted or merged. And then finally, this is a really good feature for upskilling your library staff. So now there is the ability for you to add custom content to your staff client, to your Koha staff client, and that will be available on the home page of different modules in your staff client. So now under HTML customizations, which exists in the tools module, under the staff option, we have different things. So in this case, it's really hard to see, but this highlighted option says staff cataloging home. So now you can click staff cataloging home and then add custom content, which because Koha is really good for translation, there's also whatever languages you have enabled for your Koha instance, you can now add in content for Te Reo Māori, you can add content for English New Zealand, whatever other languages. And then when your user logs in and navigates to the cataloging home page, so they navigate to the cataloging module, at the bottom of the page will be your custom content. So a few examples of what you might be able to do with this. You might want to have links to resources, SharePoint resources perhaps, where you have documented, here's a cataloging workflow we want to do, or you might want to add best practices in your custom content. so that when someone is learning cataloging at your library and they navigate to the cataloging module, they see here's the best practices you should follow when cataloging. Or let's say on the acquisition homepage, you want to have content at the bottom that links to really important SQL reports so that someone can navigate to a really important report to do with acquisitions. So it's a good way that you can train up your staff users on relevant information about the module that they are looking at. And it's a good way to also share information with your library staff users as well. So we can see these are the different new editable regions we have. So you can add content to the acquisition module homepage, authorities homepage, cataloging, lists, patron, so the members module, point of sales module, and the serials module. So it's a really good way to upskill your users and customize your, not just your Koha OPAC, but your Koha staff client as well. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining for this webinar. Really appreciate it. And if you have any questions, please do feel free to contact us or look at our website. But I'll also be really happy to take any questions. I'll just stop the recording now as well.